Snowflakes drifted through cracks of an old wooden cabin as a terrified little black girl pressed her hands against the door, begging, "Mom, please don't leave me here, it's freezing." But the white woman outside didn't even turn around. She slammed the door shut, her voice sharp and hateful. "You think anyone will want a child like you? Maybe the cold will teach you some obedience." The echo of her footsteps faded into the wind, leaving silence, the kind that breaks a child before the world even knows her name. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Inside that small cabin, 8-year-old Keisha sat curled up beside an empty stove, clutching a torn blanket that smelled of old smoke. Her tiny lips trembled as she whispered to herself, trying to remember the sound of kindness. For hours, she listened to the creak of wood and the whistle of wind through broken glass, wondering if her mother, her real mother, would ever come back for her. Her stepmother, Ashley, had driven her there after months of cruel remarks. "Don't touch the silverware. Stay out of my photos. People like you should know their place." Each sentence had cut deeper than the cold. That night, the moon hung low above the snow, silver and silent. A distant set of headlights appeared through the trees, a car slowing near the abandoned road. The driver, a tall black man named Andre, stepped out, flashlight in hand, scanning the empty trail. He wasn't supposed to stop. He was just driving home from a late construction meeting, exhausted and thinking of his newborn daughter. But something about that tiny flicker of candlelight in the cabin window made him walk closer. The sound of soft crying reached his ears. He froze and whispered, "Hello? Is someone in there?" No answer, just a sob muffled by fear. He pushed open the fragile door, and what he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. A shivering little girl with eyes too old for her age. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently, taking off his coat and wrapping around her shoulders. "You're safe now. I got you." Keisha stared up at him, unsure whether to believe it. No one had ever said those words to her before. Outside, the storm howled, but for the first time, warmth filled the cabin. And in that frozen night, two strangers' lives quietly collided, one broken by cruelty, the other destined to rewrite her future. Andre carried the trembling child out of the cabin, his coat wrapped tight around her like a shield. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. What's your name?" The girl hesitated. "Keisha," she said softly, her teeth chattering. He smiled. "Keisha, that's a beautiful name." She glanced back at the dark cabin. The place she'd been told was her punishment. "Am I in trouble?" Andre shook his head. "No, baby girl. You've been through enough trouble already." Inside his warm truck, the heater hummed while Keisha's small fingers clutched a thermos of hot cocoa he bought from a gas station hours earlier. She looked at the rising steam like it was magic. Andre turned to her and said gently, "Do you have anyone I can call?" "Family." She stared down at her lap. She said, "Nobody wants me, that my mom ran away because I was bad." Andre's jaw tightened. He didn't reply immediately. He knew that kind of pain, not from words, but from the look in someone's eyes when they've been told they don't belong. "I think your mom didn't run away," he said carefully. "I think the world failed her, and it's not going to fail you too." The drive to the city was quiet except for the sound of tires slicing through snow. Street lights flickered across Keisha's face, a face still half believing that kindness was a trick. When they arrived at Andre's home, his wife Danielle met them at the door, eyes wide in shock. "Who is this?" she asked, pulling her robe tight. Andre placed a steady hand on the girl's shoulder. "A child who needs us." Danielle looked at Keisha, at her torn sweater, her bruised hands, the way she stood like someone ready to run. Then she exhaled softly and said, "Come in, baby. Let's get you warm." For the first time in days, Keisha saw a kitchen full of light, a blanket waiting on the couch, a photo of a happy family that didn't look like her but somehow felt like safety. As Danielle tucked her in that night, Keisha whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Danielle smiled. "Because someone helped me once, too." Outside, the city lights glowed through the frost, and for the first time, Keisha fell asleep without fear. 10 years later, the same girl who once trembled in that frozen cabin now stood confidently in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of her blazer. Keisha Wellington, 20 years old, smiled faintly at the reflection staring back at her, calm, composed, unstoppable. The little girl who had been left to die was now the daughter of one of Atlanta's most respected real estate developers, Andre Wellington, and his wife, Danielle. They had given her a home, a name, and something far more powerful, belonging. Keisha glanced at the framed photo on her desk. Her graduation day, Andre holding her shoulders proudly, Danielle wiping away tears. "I told you," Andre had said that day, "the world can't define you, baby. You define it." Now, she was an architectural intern at one of the largest firms in the city, the same firm where Andre had once struggled to be taken seriously. She remembered his words. "Never let them make you feel like you're lucky to be in the room. They're lucky you walked in." Still, the world hadn't changed as much as she hoped. In meetings, she noticed the subtle looks, the slight pauses before someone said her name, the way one white supervisor, Ryan, often mistakenly called her Kayla or Tiana, even after months of correction. And when she presented her designs, bold, modern, inspired by community spaces, he'd smile politely and say, "Interesting ideas, maybe too ambitious for a girl your age." She'd nod, smile back, and quietly make her next project even better. That night, she visited Andre's office to show him her latest sketches, a community housing plan inspired by the same kind of cabin she'd once been abandoned in. "I want to turn pain into purpose," she told him. "Homes for kids like me, safe places." Andre looked at her drawings, clean, powerful, full of emotion. "Keisha," he said softly, "you're building more than houses. You're building healing." They didn't know it then, but the world was about to test everything they'd built together, their trust, their name, their legacy. Because somewhere behind polished desks and expensive suits, jealousy was brewing. And a man named Brandon Morrison, Andre's ambitious business partner, had started seeing Keisha not as family, but as a threat. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday morning. But when Keisha walked into Andre's office, she found him sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. The man who once built skyscrapers now staring at a single letter that could destroy everything. "They froze our accounts," he said quietly. "And Brandon's accusing me of embezzling company funds." Keisha blinked, thinking she'd misheard. "What? That's impossible." Andre slid the papers toward her. "Fake transactions, altered invoices, even audio clips of me approving the transfers." She scanned the documents. The signature looked perfect. The voice on the recordings, eerily close to Andre's. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. "Brandon's been planning this," she whispered. "He wants full control of the firm." Andre's voice cracked. "He was like a son to me, Keisha. I trusted him with everything." Her heart ached. She remembered the man who once brought her cocoa in the cold, now trembling like a child facing the world's cruelty all over again. "No," she said firmly, "we're not letting him bury you. Not after everything you built." That evening, as the sun dipped behind Atlanta's skyline, Keisha sat alone in her apartment, replaying Brandon's smiling face in her memory. She remembered how he always complimented her ideas, how he'd once said, "You're impressive for someone from your background." The words had felt wrong even then. Now she understood why. When she searched the news, her stomach turned. Breaking: Wellington Morrison Real Estate under investigation for fraud. Below the headline, Andre's face, framed like a mugshot. Within hours, clients began calling. Journalists camped outside the office. Danielle tried to comfort Andre, but his eyes had lost their fire. "They'll never believe me," he said. Keisha stood by the window, fists clenched. "They will," she whispered, "because I'll make them." Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered, expecting another reporter, but a familiar voice slid through the speaker, calm and smug. "Keisha," Brandon said, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Maybe it's for the best. You're talented. You don't need to go down with him. Her jaw tightened. You'll regret saying that. The next morning, Keisha sat at her desk surrounded by files, replaying every word from Brandon's call. His tone had been polite, almost gentle, the kind of tone people use when they believe they've already won. She opened Andre's financial folders on her laptop. Every supposed transfer had his digital signature. But when she zoomed in, she noticed something strange, a tiny distortion in one of the letters, the kind that only appeared in scan forgeries. Her pulse quickened. He fabricated this, she whispered. Within hours, she met Jennifer Price, a journalist friend from college who specialized in corporate corruption. They sat in a cafe downtown, steam rising from untouched coffee cups. Brandon Morrison, Jennifer repeated, typing his name into her tablet. He's been in 2 other scandals. Both ended with his partner bankrupt and him walking away clean. Keisha frowned. How does he keep getting away with it? People like him build their careers on manipulation, Jennifer replied. They target trust, then rewrite the truth. That night, Keisha went back to the office after hours. The building was quiet, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls. She sneaked into Brandon's corner office using the keycard Andre had given her years ago. On his desk lay a folder marked private records. Inside were printed emails, voice memos, and drafts, one of them labeled Wellington Scandal Plan. Her hands trembled as she read the first line. Phase 1, frame Andre for embezzlement. Phase 2, remove Keisha as beneficiary. Phase 3, merge under new ownership. A chill went down her spine. He'd planned everything, even her downfall. Suddenly, the office door clicked. Keisha froze. Brandon's reflection appeared in the glass wall behind her. Working late, are we? He said smoothly, walking in with a smirk. She quickly hid the folder behind her back. I left my notebook. He circled her slowly. You're a smart girl, Keisha. Don't waste your future trying to save a man who's already finished. People like you should learn when to step aside. Her jaw clenched. People like me? Brandon smiled. You know what I mean. But his arrogance blinded him, because while he was talking, Keisha's phone was recording every word. She looked him straight in the eyes. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. 3 days later, Brandon stood in front of cameras, flashing the confident smile of a man who believed his performance could fool the world. Transparency is the foundation of Wellington Morrison, he declared. We're deeply saddened by Mr. Wellington's choices, but integrity comes first. Behind him, banners of the company logo gleamed under spotlights. Every journalist scribbled his words down, except one. In the back row, Jennifer Price quietly pressed record on her phone. At the same time, across town, Keisha and Andre prepared for their move. Danielle packed boxes in silence, while Andre sat on the couch, hands shaking as he read the headlines that painted him as a criminal. But Keisha was done being silent. He took everything from us, Dad, she said, her voice steady. Now I'm taking it back. That evening, she called Jennifer. Tomorrow's investor meeting, Keisha said. He'll try to claim full ownership. I'll be there with proof. The next morning, the conference room buzzed with chatter as investors filled the seats. Brandon stood at the front, wearing his finest suit, ready to crown himself the new CEO. Today, he began, we start a new chapter of trust and success. The doors opened. Keisha walked in head high, followed by Andre and Jennifer. Brandon froze mid-sentence. Keisha, he said with a forced smile, this is a private meeting. Then you shouldn't have invited the press, she replied, nodding toward Jennifer, who placed a small speaker on the table. The room went silent as a recording began to play, Brandon's voice from that night in his office. People like you should learn when to step aside. Gasps filled the air. Brandon's confident grin vanished. Keisha stepped forward, placing printed documents on the table. The forged transfers, the Wellington Scandal Plan, and his personal emails. These were recovered from your office, she said. Every forged signature, every lie, and now every investor here will see what you really are, a racist thief who built his success on betrayal. Brandon tried to speak, but the weight of the evidence silenced him. Within minutes, calls went out to board, and security officers entered the room. Jennifer looked at Keisha and whispered, "You did it." Keisha turned to Brandon one last time. "You tried to bury my father's name," she said. "But you forgot we build from the ground up, and we don't break." As Brandon was escorted out in handcuffs, Andre's eyes glistened with pride. For the first time in weeks, he stood tall again. Months passed. The noise faded, the headlines changed, but the scars of betrayal remained. Yet for Keisha and Andre, something stronger had replaced the pain: purpose. In a bright new office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, the gold letters on a glass door read, Wellington Price Foundation, building homes, building hope. It was Keisha's dream turned real, a company dedicated to designing affordable housing for children who had nowhere to go, the same kind of children she once was. Andre walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his smile tired but peaceful. "You've built something beautiful, Keisha." She turned from her desk and grinned. "We did. You taught me what real family means." He chuckled softly. "You think your old man's done teaching?" Keisha laughed, then looked at the photo on the wall. The 3 of them, smiling in front of finished housing project, children running in the background. For her, that was justice. Not the courtroom kind, but the kind that healed what hatred tried to destroy. Jennifer entered a few moments later, holding a rolled-up newspaper. "We made the front page," she said proudly. The headline read, "From Abandonment to Empowerment, the Black Architect Who Turned Racism into Revolution." Keisha read it, smiling through quiet tears. "That's not just my story," she said. "That's every child who's ever been told they don't belong." Outside, workers were laying the first bricks of a new project site. A group of children waved at her from the street. One little girl with braids shouted, "Miss Keisha, I'm going to be like you one day." Keisha's throat tightened as she waved back. "You'll be even better." Andre placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than clear my name," he said. "You've given others the home you never had." The sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the office. A reminder that even after the darkest storms, something pure can still rise. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it. And with that, the story came full circle. A once-abandoned black girl who turned rejection into revolution, proving that no act of cruelty can outlast the strength of love.